Hey, welcome back to another Lone Angler podcast. I am Patrick, and tonight's guest, he's a return guest. All the way, let's see, his episode was 171, 29 episodes ago. Tonight I have with me on the phone Mr. Tyler Winter. Tyler, how you doing, buddy?
I am so good because the no junk fish bill has been officially passed.
Awesome, dude. We're going to get into that. Why don't you, because, you know, we might have some new listeners, go ahead and just let them know a little bit about yourself before we really nerd out.
Yeah, well, I am an all-species angler, and I started talking to people because I got to do a couple fishing shows with the Meat Eater Network for buffalo and for red horse. And I've been making the rounds, and then that gave me the opportunity to testify in favor of the no junk fish bill and try to work on seeing that through the legislative process and learn about that. And so now I'm here to celebrate that success.
I'm celebrating as well. Let's just dive right into it. The no junk fish bill. Some people call rough fish or junk fish rough fish. We don't see it that way, but why don't you give us a quick little summary of what it means, and then we can tear into it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, the bill started out because the Isaac Walton League and some other conservation organizations were petitioning the DNR for some rule changes and such, and then there was a bill was brought forth to advance the conservation of our native fish, often called rough fish. And I saw this being proposed, and I thought, well, this is exactly what we've already done for the with the Isaac Walton League and with these conservation groups. And so we were able to work with Rep. Jordan and the DNR and get some legislation proposed that actually built on what the Isaac Walton League had already done. Mm-hmm. And that then the bill requires, first off, it requires a report that is due at the end of this year that requires recommendations for statutory and rule changes to provide the necessary protection and conservation measures for our native fish, for the native rough fish. And that is super key because right now the rough fish category is defined in state law, and it includes both invasive species and native species. So you can't have scientific management or really any management of these 26 native species if they're defined in law right next to and included with invasive common carp. Mm-hmm. And so that has been a huge hang up for getting regulatory reform or getting any sort of protections or changes to enforcement of wanton waste laws or things like that. Because it's as long as rough fish includes invasive and native species, they all get managed as invasive, basically. Yeah, which isn't true.
Right. They all get managed as one collective unit.
Yep. And so this report is going to require recommendations before the next legislative session, and the report has to be submitted to the chairs of the Senate Environment Committee and the House Environment Committee. So this report should include a new framework, right, that's going to do away with this one group. Mm-hmm. that includes both native and invasive fish. I cannot overstate what an important step this is in the conservation of Minnesota's native fish, because from there, then we can actually go to coherent management.
Right. And the word native fish, I mean, for a fish nerd, it's super important. Now, I've mm-hmm. talked about this bill to several friends, and they're like, yeah, I guess that's cool. Well, and then I realized that they don't target all the the weird, or what I used to say unwanted, and which is still kind of sort of true to these days. There's not many people that I've run into in my angling life that would be enthusiastic to go and target silver red horse.
Mm-hmm.
Less of them are being upset by the bycatch, especially when it comes to red horse. You know what? I went on opener. I was fishing for red horse, and my buddy said, well, let's, before all that, he said, hey man, you want to go catch some suckers? And just that name in itself is kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better term, derogatory, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I know there's like the white sucker and the hognose sucker and all that, but like then you have like the red horse where people are like, oh man, that's a big red horse, but they don't say sucker. And I'm wondering how you feel about that, because I think in that term, it becomes this, the word sucker might as well be trash fish.
Yeah, and that's a tough one because and I think it's so anyone who's ever spotted some red horse or suckers in a stream and set about trying to catch them and then realizing that they don't swim over and attack things like a bass does, right? Or a pike. And it's like, wait a minute, we tend to use sucker as something that's not very smart, you sucker, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But it's like, wait a minute, I can trick a trout into biting a piece of metal.
So who's the real sucker? Is that what you're saying?
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, some predatory fish have reaction bites, and maybe they don't carefully consider. I'm trying to, I appreciate all fish, right?
Right.
So I don't want to disparage the so-called smart game fish, but I also have to call a spade a spade. It's like, hey, if you're swimming around putting just a shiny piece of metal in your mouth, it's not maybe the most challenging.
You know what? I completely understand what you're saying. And,
right.
Of course there's an emotional attachment to the game fish, what I think sometimes is kind of hyped up. Oh, it was a tough bite. Well, was it really, or were you just not doing it right?
Right. You know what? I just got back from the Boundary Waters this week, and we were fishing for lake trout, and we thought, well, we should eat a smallmouth bass too, just to make it even. And we put in, I don't know, half an hour of work on that and didn't get any. And we're going to be honest, didn't get any. I also refused to put on soft plastics or slow down or anything, because I was like, if I have to work that hard for it, I'm honestly not that interested. I'll just go back to catching lake trout. That's kind of, it's like, I could probably, if I got out 2 jigs and really slowed the canoe down, I could probably work a bass out of here, but then why would I just go back to catching tank lake trout? So
right. Oh well, and you know what? This is a safe place to say that you cooked up a smallmouth.
Yeah.
I've never eaten one, but I have heard they're excellent, and I would like to try one.
I'm going to be honest with you. You know what they taste like?
Fish?
They taste like not a lake trout. That's what they taste like. Usually if I'm eating a smallmouth bass, it means I didn't catch a lake trout. And then that tastes like failure.
Oh my gosh. But in all jokes aside, though, I mean, I kind of think of their diet as similar to the walleye's diet. So yeah. I would assume that they'd probably taste the same. Lake trout
are the pinnacle of Minnesota fish, eating Minnesota fish. They're the tastiest. And there's lake whitefish, and then everything else.
Yeah, well, you're talking to a guy that really doesn't have the palate for much of the trout. I've never really gotten into eating them. That's why I really don't fish for them that much.
Lake trout.
Yeah.
Lake trout I like better than the stream trout. Like
Okay.
they're the only fish that I really like, that I actually like the taste of enough that I have a hard time letting them go.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
So
I've had some
that's
smoked lake trout and it was excellent. There again, smoked fish, it all depends on who's doing it. I had that conversation a couple weeks back when I came home from sturgeon fishing up on the Rainy River.
Mhm.
And my dad actually was like, "Wow, did you keep one?" I was like, "No, they were too big for the slot or too small for the slot. It's a pretty narrow slot." And I said, even if I got one in the slot limit, like, what am I going to do with 40 pounds of sturgeon steaks?
I think, yeah, eating a sturgeon because it's a fish is like burning your house down because it's made out of wood.
Right. I mean, well,
Like,
and my big thing was like, okay, so I harvested this sturgeon, and I can buy a sturgeon tag this year because I actually bought a full complete license instead of the conservation license.
mm-hmm,
Just because my parents have been requesting more fish. But,
mm-hmm.
there again, it's like, well, this guy has a recipe. This guy, there's no consistency in it, and like,
Yeah.
and I'm the kind of guy that's like, okay, I'd eat on a steak for a little bit, and then I'd be like, okay, I'm over it for a whole year, and I'm certainly not going to freeze smoked fish, and now I got to figure out how to get
Yeah.
rid of it all and stuff like that, but.
No.
And then there's
No.
also, the growth rate of sturgeon in itself. They're really, really slow growing.
Yeah.
And as a kid, as a 49-year-old, remembering back into the early to mid 80s even, the Rainy River was pretty infamous for the amount of pollution, how polluted that river was from the paper mill in International Falls. And
Yeah.
there was a time where, like, you couldn't eat fish out of there, period. Well, now you got a fish that's, 60 years old. Well, you do the math, and that fish was swimming around in that.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to eat that either.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I just go up there because, they're it's my style of fishing, especially for the first open water adventure.
Yeah.
There's no run and gun, figure out, check this spot, check that spot. It's like, all right, I'm going to find the edge of a hole, and we're going to put the anchors down, kick back, turn on a radio, and wait for the little tiny minuscule bite of a fish that could be close to 100 pounds. And that's always fascinating.
And yeah, you dial it in, you get your spot. But I mean, like, and it's so somewhat similar to sucker fishing, which is I think where we started, right? But it's like I don't have sturgeon swimming by my house or whatever, but sometimes, and it can be really rewarding to be like, all right, this spot, we're gonna, the backside of this rock bar, this bend, this hole, we're gonna sit down, we're gonna take a little bit of patience, although like if I don't have a bite within 20 minutes, I figure that the sucker fishing is not happening here today. Like, got to try, something else. But like, you get it dialed in and you call the spot. And I love taking people out for, some of my spots close to home, and they'll be like, we get one, and like, that was fast. I'm like, well, yeah, of course, because I checked the spot yesterday to make sure they were, be in, and like, like you dial them in, you learn these spots, and you're rewarded. And I think the more and more people, like you went out for Silver Red Horse in the opener. So many people were changing the way we fish, where we fish to connect with nature. We fish to get outside, and that doesn't happen if you're stuck in line at a boat ramp. It doesn't happen driving 2 hours to get to a spot that's, really good because you think all of the spots close to you are fished out. Like, that's not how we, relax and connect with nature or whatever. And, so people are looking for new opportunities. And it's like, well, if you're like if you're going to let most of the fish go anyway, or like me, you're going to let most of the fish go anyway, who cares if it's bony? Right. Like, that was, that seems to be a major distinction between, game fish and quote rough fish is like, are they easy to clean? Right.
Yeah.
Like, wait, but when people are driving, they always say it with pride too. They always like, I mainly fish in the driftless. And I'm like, that's great. but also you should fish close to home because every backyard needs some stewardship and needs a stakeholder who's invested in it. I drove down to the driftless to go fishing on the opener. I was fishing for red horse on the opener in the driftless, but I also fish close to home, and I think more and more people are seeing those opportunities because most people, are fishing for whatever bites, and as we appreciate just catching a big fish that we're not going to eat anyway, like who cares if it's got a red tail or it's a silver tail,
right?
Or
it's
like, hey, people, more and more people are just like, hey, I caught something I didn't even know what it was, and then it's like, well, that's cool, to see something new in the world.
Exactly, and I think that dynamic is becoming more and more prevalent every year. Even though I'll fish for anything, but I enjoy pan fishing, and I have a majority of my life. And it used to be you only went pan fishing to bring home meat. Even ice fishing, it was harder back then. You had big, heavy gas augers or still hand augers, and it was a lot of work, and you better bring home some rewards. So keeping panfish was very, very common. But fast forward to the present day, and I see people releasing panfish all the time now.
Yeah.
I see people practicing selective harvest. I see people have their own little slot limits that they stick to. Where before it was like, oh, that one's too small to eat. That one is going to make a lot of food. And, they're filleting 15, 16, 17-inch crappies or 11, 12-inch bluegills. I think that whole dynamic has changed. And that's what I'm hoping for with this no junk fish bill, is that people will, and it's going to take some time and some promotion from guys like you and I to say, hey, these are really fun to catch. You don't necessarily have to eat it, but man, to target it, it's a lot harder than you think. And, and for them, I think this no junk bill is like that first step towards that ultimate goal. I'd like to call it a goal.
Yeah. No, I mean, and like the idea would be, and it's almost like, if you start talking about it, it's like people will think you've got it's a conspiracy theory. Like there's a whole bunch of fish out there that they haven't told you about that you could catch and enjoy. And people are like, what do you mean? And I'm like, no, that's true. Like you go out to the rivers and like, there's a whole bunch of fish that, these are, should be managed as a resource. You can eat some of them. Some of them are actually already have, conservation designations that are already threatened in Minnesota or in an adjoining state. So I would recommend not eating a river red horse, since anywhere you can find one in Minnesota, it's connected to a Wisconsin population that's already designated as threatened. And so, like, there's, it's both, right? Of like, they are a resource that you can utilize, and some of them are also just like they're a conservation need. But you can't get at that dichotomy when they're just rough fish, right? And so having these recommendations, having the DNR sit down, they have until December 15th to write out their recommendations for statutory and rule changes necessary to separate this category of fish into invasive and native. And so then we can start, like, and you're talking about like the value of native fish. We're talking about it, from the perspective of anglers, right? Like, which obviously I love to catch fish. I'm fishing, even when I'm not fishing, I'm thinking about how I'm going to catch more fish. But you also, from an ecosystem point of view, from a science point of view, from a biology management point of view, I love to tell people that the Mississippi River by my house, which is in the Twin Cities, they're freshwater sponges living on the rocks. in the Mississippi River in the metro.
Mm-hmm.
And that, blows a lot of people's minds that don't ever see a freshwater, like a sponge, or think it's a coral reef thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the river here has been infested with zebra mussels for 20 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
We found a zebra mussel shell last summer. One, despite the low water, because the native fish in the river eat zebra mussels. And so because my river here, the Mississippi River here, is full of red horse, we have freshwater sponges instead of zebra mussels. So even if, even if you don't want to catch red horse, right? But if you don't like invasive species, you benefit from having these native fish in your river, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you like to see eagles, guess what? You have a stake in native fish. Like if you don't like invasive, if you like freshwater mussels and just want freshwater mussels to exist, freshwater drum are host to 11 species of freshwater mussels. We have to have these fish around just so that these freshwater mussels, which are the most threatened group of animals in America, can persist. We have to have these fish, which have been disparaged as rough fish.
Yes.
And so it's like it's a whole host of things, and all we have to do is not kill them all.
Right. Yep. I agree. And I do have a question. How, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, but, and I don't want to paint the Department of Natural Resources in a negative light whatsoever. My dad is a retired Department of Natural Resources, although forestry division. I grew up around a lot of these guys and stuff. But how do you know, like, is the Department of Natural Resources, are they excited about writing this paper and in doing these studies?
Well, I have to say, so going back to when I introduced myself, I got to testify for the House and Senate Environment Committees in favor of this bill. And sitting next to me, also testifying in support, was the Deputy Director of Fisheries and Wildlife. And so the DNR showed up and testified in support of this bill with me.
That's right. I remember that now.
And so, well, I mean, but your audience doesn't remember that. So it's a good thing you brought. It's a good thing you asked.
Yeah.
So this bill, this language, and the funding that's in it, this is fully supported by the DNR. And in fact, actually, we're having native fish work group meetings this summer where the DNR is bringing together a whole bunch of different people. This is part of the Isaac Walton League's process and petition process as well. And we're talking about a lot of the stuff that's going to like help inform this report.
Awesome.
The DNR is doing that, so I'm happy to say that the DNR has been a partner in this and has supported it. I don't know if we'd be here today celebrating the success without the DNR support.
Yeah.
But every step of the way they have. And actually I mentioned the funding. And the funding is for staff time. If you look in your fishing regulations, I think it might be page 36 or something like that, there's a little sidebar in there about the Federal Aid and Sport Fish Restoration Program. And the Minnesota DNR gets a lot of their funding from the Sport Fish Restoration Program. And of course, the word sport is in there. And that's kind of where the hang-up happens, because they have, and many other states that have as well, have always interpreted this as being strictly for, quote, sport fish. So we all pay, I believe it's a 10% excise tax.
Yes.
On all fishing gear. And so I buy a lot of hooks and a lot of line, and I would love to know actually if that also happens on worms, because I buy a lot of worms. But all the fishing gear I buy specifically to go catch all of these fish, I'm paying a 10% excise tax on it, which is then being directed to sport fish. And so that has been one of the hangups. The DNR has not felt that they could divert license fees or sportfish restoration fees to these non-game, non-sport fish.
Mm-hmm.
And so this funding in this bill from the Natural Heritage Enhancement Fund, I believe it. Yeah, from the Heritage Enhancement account, covers the staff time that's necessary to do this work. So the DNR, I've been told that the phrase rough fish is used in statute or in administrative rules 70 times. And so making these changes and these recommendations has to be done carefully,
Mm-hmm.
so that we don't create some weird loophole, right? That like restricts our ability to manage invasive fish or requires us to do something with native fish because somebody missed a line, or there's a typo or a misunderstanding. But just an example, this is a favorite example of mine of like how this phrase has gotten so ingrained and like woven into our statutes. So the first time I could find this like phrase in statute, rough fish in statute, I believe it was 1907. And so since then, it's been used in a lot of places where it should have said invasive fish.
Mm-hmm.
And a case is there's rules about when the Department of Transportation builds a bridge or a culvert, it has to allow for fish passage, mm-hmm. unless the stream only contains rough fish or the structure is intended to block rough fish. And so that should have those structures and that should have just said, invasive carp.
Right.
But they're like, well, we already have this rough language in statute. We'll just use that here. And so now freshwater drum, which I mentioned earlier, they did a study and freshwater drum are missing about 60% of barriers that they surveyed, which means that the 11 species of mussels that depend on them also missing about 60% of barriers. And yet we have this phrase in our statute where like if they're replacing a culvert, building a bridge or something like that, they don't have to account for fish passage if it's a rough fish.
Right.
And so it's almost insidious. Like it's just woven through all this stuff where it's like it should have said invasive from the beginning and then we wouldn't be here. But that's also why it's important to get this out, right? So that we can have coherent management. So we can just allow the freshwater drum and the other 25 species to live out their life cycle and do what they're supposed to be doing of eating invasive zebra mussels and helping native mussels.
Yeah,
and we can eat a few too.
The thing that I get from it too is recognizing the checks and balances of an ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
Those fish, thrive in that water, for a specific reason. And if they're not in there anymore, something else is going to happen. There's a chain reaction that's going to happen.
Something will replace them, probably something we don't like as much, or there'll be a gap in the ecosystem and like the zebra mussels will take over. It's like the only thing, and I've got a 10-pound stack of paper of research that I've read, and the only thing that they have ever seen that's been proven about like rough fish removal that's been done is that you end up with less fish.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of early research I read where they were, I'd find this title and be very promising about, Minnesota paper on rough fish removal and, whatever. And then you read the whole study and it just like tells you the number of pounds of fish they killed. And they don't actually tell you what like benefit they got out of it. It's just like, we removed 10,000 pounds of suckers from the lake.
Mm-hmm.
Check. And I'm like, well, wait, did it benefit the game fish population at all? Like they just ended there. Like, well, obviously.
Yeah. And I think when that happens, there's this misconception that, we removed 10,000 pounds of suckers. So that means that, the walleye population will boom. When when I think the reality of it is, I don't think suckers eat that many walleye eggs.
No, I mean, no,
which
and in fact, what they found is that you're saying like unbalancing the population. They studied one lake where they did intensive sucker removals, and the first thing that happened was that the perch population went up, and the perch population went up. Like it works, right? The perch population got so high that it actually suppressed the walleye reproduction. They were eating walleye fry.
which I was gonna mention this, and this is a perfect time. If you want to call a fish a rough fish, I think the yellow perch would qualify in my opinion, and that's based off of, my God, I'm trying to catch crappies, and the bottom is literally crawling with 5-inch perch, and they're nothing but pests.
Well, those perch were actually removed. They used to be considered rough fish, and I believe they were removed in 1973.
Oh, really? I did
along
not know
with
that.
turtles. Along with turtles. Turtles also used to be called rough fish, which kind of really points to the fact that this doesn't make very much sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like, and I mean, you can also look at eel pout and the rise of eel pout, right? Where I remember as a kid that eel pout were definitely left on the ice and eating them was a joke. And now, man, Instagram in the winter is just pictures of eel pout.
It is.
Big, cool, patterned eel pout and smiling faces, and they're game fish now.
Yeah, and you know what? And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Bemidji is one of those places that put eel pout on the map for targeting, for fun, and that kind of stuff. And guys like Matthew Brewer and Jason Rylander pretty much pioneered it in this area. They definitely took me out for my first burbot targeting. I don't know how many years ago that was. And yeah, it was super popular. And the same thing, when I was a kid, I used to go to Lake of the Woods with my dad, and you'd see them laying on the ice all over the place. And they finally abolished that because it wasn't because of, leaving them on the ice. It was all of a sudden the lake was just, there was fox and coyotes and eagles and all kinds of other wildlife out there eating these fish. And you were getting that wildlife human being clash out there. And it wasn't so much to, okay, we got to stop this because, we can't kill this many burbot. It was the fact that it was drawing out all these animals out of the woods for free food.
Yeah.
And that's never a good idea. But I
also like to think too that now that they're game fish, the lake whitefish, lake herring, and burbot came off the rough list. And I like to think that actually did cause some people to be like, well, wait a minute. They were on why? What is this list? What is the underlying logic of this list that these fish were all grouped together? And, eel pout very quickly made, this leap from rough to something that was very prized. And then people also realized too, very vulnerable to harvest in the winter when they're spawning. And that because they need such cold water, that we're seeing them decline or disappear from, places they, used to be on the southern edge of their range. And, that's, I like to think that, that change maybe did get a few people thinking about what is the underlying purpose of this rough list? And it's look, I've done, I've read the old statutes. I've read the old research papers. I've tried to understand this as best I can, and I'm here to tell you there was no underlying logic. The list used to include turtles and yellow perch too.
Turtles, they're not even a fish.
Right? Exactly. So it's and now we've made it this far where people are going wait a minute, what if we manage invasive fish like we were trying to remove them, and we removed native fish like they were native?
Yeah, and another thing too, I think that was realized too is these quote unquote rough fish or the unwanted fish are, over time, as we learned, are good indicators of a healthy or unhealthy fishery, or water clarity, any of that stuff.
In fact, my feelings about smallmouth bass may be because rivers with good populations of red horse have good populations of smallmouth bass. I can understand that if you were fishing for smallmouth bass in a place where you did not have red horse, flipping rocks when they spawn, and where you didn't have red horse for the bass to follow and get a free meal, because they will follow, especially large red horse. They'll follow them and look and ambush crayfish that the red horse scares out. And so when I'm fishing for a red horse, I got to catch the bass sometimes on either side of it first before I can get my bait to the bigger red horse.
That's crazy, man. That's like the wolf in raven relationship. Have you heard about? You're familiar with that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely like that. You can watch them follow. They'll just be like half a fish length down, and these bass will be following this, especially if it's a really big, like 8-10 pound red horse. They'll be following that thing around, looking for it to bump rocks or whatever. And then, you throw your worm out there, and the bass with its big mouth and a predatory nature swims up and grabs it right away. And they're just following these, So if you are fishing in a river that doesn't have a good red horse population and doesn't have clean cobbly rocks and doesn't have these, a bunch of 2, 3, 4 inch red horse fingerlings to grow your bass up to those 20-inch trophy sizes, you might have a hard time fishing for smallies in a place that doesn't have that high quality habitat and that food chain. But I'm fishing in those rivers that have the good rocks and have a red horse migration, and man, I'm catching so many bass trying to fish for suckers.
You know what, though? That answers my question, I think. So on Mother's Day weekend, fishing opener, on that Sunday before I headed back to Bemidji, I went sucker fishing with my buddy, and I put the picture up on Instagram. My first cast out with a night crawler in an eddy of some high water and some pretty turbulent water. There's an eddy pocket. He said, cast right in there. I casted, and no sooner did that crawler hit the water, and I was hooked up. And I figured this could be a small pike. But it was like a 3.5 pound, maybe 4 pound largemouth in a river that even my buddy who, this river we were on, we grew up next to as kids, and he fishes it all the time. He's caught nice smallmouth, but he's caught 1 or 2 largemouth, but they're always like 10, 12 inches. And he was even looking at me like, what did you just do? I was like, I don't know. But now that you say that because I was wondering, how is this big bass sustaining his size in this river? We have high water right now, but on a normal water year, you can walk across the rocks. There's some deeper, pools on corners and stuff, but it doesn't seem like enough water to sustain a fish of that size. And you might have just answered that question. So I can't wait to give him a call this week and be like, I think I know how that fish
late in the summer when the sucker fingerlings, like the young of the year growing up, I wade a lot. It's my favorite way to fish. And in the margins, you'll see, little fish with red tails, and they're always up like as shallow as they can get, like they're afraid for their lives.
Yeah.
And it's like you see those like late in the summer, like when they're fingerling size or whatever, but it's like I don't catch a lot of suckers that are like under 15 inches or something, right? Or maybe in the right river I can get them down to 12 or something, right? But there's definitely this predation that happens, where I've been in small red horse rivers turned a corner and there's a muskie laying in a pool or something like that. It's like, okay, now I know why there's so many fish in the shallows.
Right. Well, just that scenario right there leads me into this question. as things move forward in this no junk bill, I was thinking about this today as I was driving back from Brainerd back into my Bemidji office. I know that there's suckers being used for muskies in the fall, tip up fishing in the winter for pike, even smallmouth and walleye fishing in the fall with light suckers. You go into a bait shop and you can get light northern all the time. I mean, is that's probably not going to change. I'm sure you'll still be able to use them as bait.
I'm positive of it. Because I just took 2 dozen white suckers, medium pike minnow, type to the boundary waters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing I don't think any of I don't want to see that anyone loses these fish as a resource, or that or anyone loses fish as a resource, right? Like fish that are used that are a resource will be managed and protected as a resource, right? If you put something on a pedestal, like let's say a spotted owl, then it becomes a pain in your ass, right?
Yeah.
And nobody wants to create spotted owls, right?
Yep.
What I always like to point out to people, though, and this is, gets to your point, is that white suckers might be the most valuable fish by the pound in Minnesota. I know down here in the metro in the fall, decoy-sized white suckers can go for $1 per inch, which makes them more expensive than walleye fillets.
Yes, they do.
And so I then sometimes, see a white sucker tossed in the bank or photos of white suckers that are, not going to be eaten. Or, I've seen like somebody had a huge, I think they were feeding them to a mink farm or something like that, right? And it's like, if you had netted those fish in the fall, you'd be sitting on $1,000, of bait at retail. And you're doing what with it? Like it's fertilizer or it's mink food or something like. You could sell the fish as bait and buy more mink food.
Right. No, I get it.
Right? Like it's, and so there's like that kind of thing. I actually just read a paper. They analyzed the relative abundance of Minnesota's fishes from 1970 to 2013. And white suckers have exhibited a decline across the entire state since 1970. And that's a fish that we consider completely ubiquitous, right? There's like, that is the most common, like you look at a map of their distribution, they're everywhere, right? But we also count on them for our bait supply. We harvest them recreationally. And then you look at this paper and they sit in every lake type that they looked at, both in gill nets and trap nets, they showed a significant decline in the catch per net of white suckers over the entire 43 years that they looked at. And that to me kind of speaks to the idea that it's not an inexhaustible resource, right? And that you can't just say that like everything's fine. I'm often asked for data, like, oh, if there is a problem, then we will act, right? I'm like, well, I just read this, I just found this paper, and I'm like, wait a minute, like this is a 40-year decline. White suckers aren't going to go extinct anytime soon, but it might explain why they're just going for $1 per inch at the bait shop.
Right.
Like maybe we shouldn't wait until they're going for $2 an inch, to decide that we should change the limit from unlimited.
Yeah, and I think that's a nice trend that I see kind of happening with this too. Is it's more proactive than reactive, because usually when it's reactive, it's far too late, and it requires especially a bunch of money to fix it. What's that?
Especially with fish.
Yes.
like that's like fish restoration is different, right? Like you put turkeys in this state. I can't remember when in the 1970s they brought turkeys back to the state, and they spread themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's mostly land. Each river, each lake, especially with the thousands of dams and barriers that we have in this state and all of our water, each stream and water lake divided by dam is an island, right? And these fish are declining. It could be because they don't have access to spawning habitat. It could be pollution. It could be overharvest. We don't necessarily know. What we do know is that unlike the walleye stocking program, we're not going to get $35 million to build fish hatcheries until, even if these fish are threatened or endangered. Like, that's not going to happen, right?
Right.
And fish stocking isn't necessarily that great at actually bringing fish back anyway.
No, it actually isn't.
There's a lot of fish populations throughout the world and through history that did not come back when people thought they would. And so it's much, much better to just not deplete them, right? We were going to talk about the Star Tribune comment, but I took exception to the fact that they said pouring money
right
into the native fish thing when they're asking for $134,000. That is what the Minnesota DNR budgets for one staff person pay and benefits, right?
Yep.
So there's going to be one person or a full-time equivalent, two people working half-time, whatever it is, to work on native fish conservation out of the entire Minnesota DNR. And, the Waterville hatchery is going to get like $7 million.
Yeah. Yeah, I have that article printed out here, and that's what I picked up when I read the whole thing. They started throwing these numbers out, and then there's no number for this, but they just said pouring money into. Well,
yeah,
134,000 is a lot of money, but compared to what was it?
35 million for hatcheries this year.
Yeah, 35 million. Yeah. But hey, you know what? Something is better than nothing. And
and that's the thing. It's like these fish have persisted not because we've been stocking them, but despite everything we've thrown at them, right? Like, there have been barriers, they've been poisoned, they've been shot, they've been thrown on the bank. And yeah, there are places where they are like, they're missing from. Like, there are places where these fish have disappeared. But the fact of the matter is if we just treat them like a resource and don't intentionally deplete them, they will continue to be a resource for us.
Right.
Like, they don't need $35 million in stocking. They just need some clean water, some habitat, and a little bit of respect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, like when you were talking about, reintroducing turkeys here and land, water, in my opinion, is far more environmentally sensitive than land is. Mm-hmm. And I think that I was going to say that earlier, that kind of proposes the challenge of managing fish, whether they're native unwanted rough fish or game fish. I mean, it's just water is so delicate. And you brought up zebra mussels before, and everybody panics when they hear the word zebra mussels. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I think nature corrects itself. And yeah, what happens to a lake if they filter the water? And yes, it breaks down a little bit of the food chain, but I don't think it's as much as anything else. And they go away. It takes a long time, but they go away. The water clears up, fishing gets harder. Nothing. I don't think it's wrecked. It's not like when zebra mussels get into a system, everything within 2 years is devoid of life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it changes the food chain, and that probably makes it harder for people. Like, the fish aren't in the spots they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes some time for the native fish to adjust that to their diet. But they've done experiments where they just put two concrete blocks out side by side, and they wrap one in like chicken wire, and they leave the other one unprotected, and they can see how many more are on the chicken wire block, right? And the only thing the chicken wire stops is fish.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's a very simple experiment. It's genius.
Yeah, no,
And
that
like,
is.
oh, right? Like, and so, and even the big fish, it only stops the fish that, are too big to get their mouth in the chicken wire. And so, like, we know that native fish can make significant impacts on zebra mussels, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it takes them some time, but then it's also like, well, why aren't we stopping freshwater drum for these zebra mussel lakes? Because they're the number one consumer of the zebra mussels. Red horse and other fish will do their part too, but freshwater drum are like specialists on mussels.
Oh, yeah. And after I caught my first one, I started targeting them, and then I started looking around at them, looking in their mouth and stuff, and they've got these great big ass molars in the roof of their mouth, and I kind of quickly figured out that those are for cracking shells. But there again, you would think by logic,
too.
Yeah, you'd think by logic, like, oh, well, we'll just plant some sheep's head in here. Well, if they weren't there to begin with, that isn't always such a good idea either.
No, we probably shouldn't do that. But I like the idea.
Yeah.
That's like, well, we have 35 million. We're going to put however much into hatcheries. Like, can we just set a little bit aside? Like, it's like, hey, well,
Hey,
But if you told somebody you were going to stock sheep's head in the lake, they'd probably flip out, right? And be like,
well, yeah, they screw up your walleye fishing. But for a guy like me, like, once I learned that the lake north of town here had, at one time, and when I started fishing for them, had absolutely huge sheep's head for a lake up here. I was like, yeah, I'm going to fish for these. I'll probably catch some walleyes, but those will be a bycatch because these fight incredibly harder.
They can get huge too.
And they're just a neat fish. And again, kind of like the eel pout, it's such a special thing. It's not like, and it's not like largemouth or smallmouth. You can go just, about anywhere to catch those. But like, even around here, burbot, they're only in a handful of lakes up here. Sheep's head, there's only a handful of spots. And it's kind of cool. And, when we're talking about rough fish, this always kind of comes up when I'm talking about it and stuff. I get they try to paint me into a corner and they're like, well, do you want to stop bow fishing? Well, much like you said, I don't want to take anybody's hobbies away or anything like that, but I would like to see a change in not seeing or hearing about, like, yeah, we filled, a half a dozen 55-gallon drums with, 15-pound sheep's head.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that's very, very cool. Or very ecologically sound. I don't want to use the word cool.
Yeah, but like I hunt, and like the bow fishing is hunting fish, right? Like I don't want to stop hunting deer. And I'm teaching my kids to hunt, and I was trying to think of like, what do I want them to know, right? And it's like, well, respect for your quarry. Use what you take only what you can use, fair chase, and leave space in the world for everything to complete its role, right?
Right.
Because it's like, man, I don't like tripping over pocket gopher mounds in my yard, right? But I also look at the pocket gopher mound and go, they probably are doing something really important for the soil. And there's probably a bunch of animals that like spend the winter in their burrows, and who knows what else needs to like pocket gopher burrows to live in. And so maybe I don't like pocket gophers here, but I for damn sure am not going to let anyone even make the pocket gopher extinct, right?
Right.
And the same thing should apply. That same logic applies to things that we can't see everything they're doing that like is obvious as pocket gophers digging holes. Like we've been talking about all these things these fish are doing and how they, whatever. It's like, so don't ever set out, in the morning being like, I want to eliminate this thing, right?
Right.
Practice, fair chase. Take only what you can use. Eat what you take. Bow hunting for deer is often done with like a sense of reverence, that it's like you could do that same thing with big mouth buffalo, where you're like, I took this amazing big mouth buffalo, and it's gonna feed my family for a week, and what a trophy. Like you can practice the sport with the same, with the same ethics we bring to deer hunting or grouse hunting or duck hunting.
Yep. And I think I know, like in my early burbot years here in Bemidji, there was no limit, and there were guys that because there was no limit, it was nothing goes back down that hole because there is no limit. It's almost like a treat. Like I've been bound to 6 walleyes. I've been bound to 6 bass. I've been bound to 20 crappies or 10 crappies. But here is a species where if I get on them, I can sit here all day and take as much as I want without any repercussions.
Yeah.
And I think there's a little bit of that mentality is still kind of left, because
I've heard people say that they don't have a limit, quote, because the DNR wants you to kill them.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And the fact of the matter is that the fishing regulations we have now are really a product of culture and history.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't maybe as much intent as people assigned to it. And, I think historically the idea was like there isn't that much demand on burbot. And so if someone wants to have a fish fry, it doesn't make sense to have a limit, right? But as we've seen, the technology, electric augers, the side scan sonars, the live scope,
yep.
The number of people participating, how much we fish, people who are into fishing, we fish hard now.
Yeah.
The clothing's gotten better, the gear's gotten better, and it's like the methods have been liberalized since 2009, and when you see the research that there's a steady decline in white suckers, a fish that's common, you do have to ask yourself, like, we're putting more pressure on this resource, even though people tell me, oh, they're inexhaustible. Oh, the DNR wants you to kill them. It's like, no. Like, the assumption was that we weren't putting pressure on these resources, but we are,
Yeah, we are now. And I think going back to when, these no limit fish, it's just something that also had no monetary value or no attention. Like there weren't anglers going out and targeting burbot. They were always just a bycatch. There's like, they really don't need a limit because people aren't going out after them to bring home.
Right.
Makes sense?
And the assumption then would be like that you would also then, if you weren't going to eat it, you'd let it go.
Right.
Like, which gets actually the other thing that changed, this meshes so perfectly well with our conversation, is there was a change to the wanton waste law. So the wanton waste law was always very, very simple. It was like, you may not wantonly waste or destroy the usable part of a protected wild animal. And I always was wondering why fish in a pile or fish on the ice weren't being, why that wasn't being enforced. Mm-hmm. And it comes back to that like thing where native and invasive fish were being managed the same, where it was like, well, we don't want people to stop harvesting carp or only harvest the carp they want to eat. And, these fish are all in this group. And so carp were actually legally they were protected wild. They're still legally protected wild animals, and so the wanton waste law could have applied to them. Well, this year now they made a change. It's
Okay.
the same exact language. You may not wantonly waste or destroy the usable part of a protected wild animal, and then B, this does not apply to common carp. And so
Oh,
this actually may mark the first time where we actually do have some little separation now, right? Between, because by process of elimination, then it must apply to native fish.
yeah, and there's also I think there's also a little confusion there too with the name common carp.
Mm.
For people that don't know, common carp, if correct me if I'm wrong, they are evasive. They were brought
Yep.
over from England. I think I learned this from when we did that podcast 29 episodes ago. I think you told me they were brought over. They were prized in England, and they were brought over here to because they were so prized over there, they wanted them over here, and they just kind of took off.
Yep.
But grass carp, are those are evasive as well, aren't they? Are those the same thing? I'm not too
Those
hip.
those are also invasive.
Okay.
To the best of my knowledge, we do not have reproducing grass carp in Minnesota.
Okay.
Every once in a while, I think one gets caught by a commercial angler on the Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know of any place where they're actually established in Minnesota.
Okay.
In a lot of places, they've been stocked, and they have them. They breed sterile ones that they can use for controlling vegetation.
Yep.
But those are not widespread in Minnesota.
Yeah. I've never angled for carp. I've watched, well, you turned me on to that series on Amazon.
Yeah, that's
I
that's a
watched
radical,
that
isn't
thing
it?
like 3 times.
It's pretty great. It is pretty great. The Chasing the Impossible.
That's what it was. Yes.
And actually, the last summer I actually went to England,
Yeah.
and what I saw there, as far as angling went, should be a wake up call to all Americans who fish. I got to fish on a piece of river that was owned by the Lord Salisbury. And the gentleman who took me out, he had a mile that he had been granted access to by the Lord Salisbury.
Wow.
And I was trying to explain to my host that I had every water body basically in Minnesota that I could get my feet onto, right? That I had miles of the Mississippi and miles of streams and access everywhere, right? And they don't have public water
No.
in England like we do.
Mm-mm.
So his spot, like he had, like the Lord Salisbury had given permission to fish, for the next section up was somebody else, right? Like,
That's crazy, man.
right? And they are also jealously guarded. So in another town, there was a fishing club, and you had to buy a license to fish their waters from the fishing club. Some of their water was completely privately held. They didn't even sell licenses to day passes. They didn't sell day passes to strangers. You had to be a member, members only. There was no bait shop in that town. So the pet store was where they sold licenses from, if they were open. Because despite the fact that England has 60 million people, 12 times the population of Minnesota, they have half the anglers.
Wow.
Because there isn't the access. The fishing isn't as good.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have places to go. And so I was in London, and there are a handful of fishing shops. I have more tackle stores in my hometown than there are in London. Like,
That's wild.
and then the knock on, this is where it gets really like draconian, right? This is where it gets really scary. Their wastewater treatment plants and their pollution control agency are not doing their job.
Ooh.
And so the wastewater treatment plants are not being held to account, and they are dumping sewage into the rivers of England, and they were all privatized, and so they're putting profits ahead of water quality. And there isn't the large group of stakeholders of, like in Minnesota, we can't do. There's somebody downstream, right? And if like the water turns foul and smells bad and the fish start dying, they're going to call, right? And in England, it's like, well, what are they going to do if they're even out there? Like the Lord Salisbury certainly isn't going walking up and down his river worrying about it. And so they then now, like, the water isn't even necessarily safe to touch.
Ew, man.
Right. So maybe this brings it full circle. I've joined a bunch of conservation organizations over the last several years as I've gotten more involved in this issue and learned more about Minnesota's great conservation community. The Isaac Walton League, Minnesota Conservation Federation, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. I even started my own nonprofit. Well, not my own, me and a group of people who all met through roughfish.com have started an organization called Native Fish for Tomorrow.
Yep. Because
we want to bring the consumptive conservation, also known as rod and gun conservation, to suckers and bowfin and buffalo and drum. And, we looked around and we saw how this works so well for turkeys and deer and trout. And we thought, let's do this for our native fish in Minnesota. And I would strongly encourage all of your listeners to join a conservation group.
Yes.
Like the Isaac Walton League is very well organized and very active in legislation and stuff like that. Native Fish for Tomorrow is showing up and testifying, and we're doing on this topic. We're making sure we're there. But just get involved. Sign up for some email. Get on some email lists. Be aware. I've found that sending emails, sending public comments, sending written testimony, it does make a difference, because it's a little surprising, maybe a little alarming, how few people are doing that. Right. And so your voice does matter. Write your representative, join a conservation organization, go to a meeting, write an email. You can have an impact. I know, because I went from a guy catching buffalo on Dot's boat to sitting in a Senate chamber, to my own surprise.
Which, congratulations. That is an awesome story. I like the way you put
right?
that. Yeah.
And I at some point I looked around and I'm like, this is a joke, right? Like, somebody more qualified is going to show up, right? Like, but the fact of the matter is that if you show up, you are the most qualified person.
Right.
So try it. Everyone who's listening, try it. Show up. You might just find out you're the most qualified person, and you might make a big impact on something you care about.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, for sure. And Native Fish for Tomorrow is on Instagram. And that's something I'm gonna probably join that. Well, I'm going to join that. I'm gonna sign up for the emails and stuff. I'm not as busy as I once was, and so there's no excuse, because I can't sit here and talk to you, and not be a little bit more proactive, especially for stuff that I'm passionate about.
Give yourself some credit, though, because you're doing honestly, you're doing what is the most important work, and what is a big part of Native Fish for Tomorrow's mission is by making this content and communicating with people. Because still, the biggest hurdle to native fish conservation is convincing people that a buffalo is a fish.
Yeah.
and that is a joke, and it's also true, right? That when when the fish that you want to use and to like be your standard bearer, right, and be like, hey, the bigmouth buffalo is a fascinating fish that can live to be 127 years old, and is commercially important, is historically important in Minnesota, and it's a amazing 50-pound beautiful tuna shaped fish, right?
Yeah.
And then people go, that's a joke, that's buffalo are mammals.
Right. Well, wasn't it Ben Franklin that proposed that the turkey be our national bird?
Right.
And I mean, it would be kind of, you look at a turkey and you're like, ooh. See, and what I'm getting at is, as passionate as you are about buffalo, the fish, like, that should almost be the state fish because it's that important and it's that cool. But when its general appearance for most people is lacking.
Hey, I'll tell you what though, if you ask a kid to draw a fish, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're going to make an oval shape with a big tail in the end.
Yep.
And it could be, I think they're drawing buffalo, honestly. Like,
could be.
Because their mouth points just straight forward. They're not bottom feeders. Mm-hmm. And you pull one out of the air, out of the water into the air, and they're just like oval shaped. They're shaped like a tuna, just symmetrical. But they do have some lips. But hey, if they were a movie star, like, those are movie star lips. That's all I'm saying. Like,
well put. Well put.
Right. But that's still, like, I still talk to people, every week who ask me if it's a type of carp, or if a red horse is a type of carp, or they say a cotton carp or something. And I'm like, we still need, there's a significant, hardcore anglers. I hear you, I see you, right?
Yep.
But that I'm not kidding. Like, putting out content where you draw a distinction between carp and native fish to get people curious about it and educate, like, that is still one of the big things that we just need to do. What I would like to see, and what our goal is at Native Fish for Tomorrow, is we have an artist on our board of directors, does great stuff, and we are making designs for native fish signs, right? Because so many boat ramps and so many access points have notifications about invasive species. Mm-hmm. And what I found is the invasive species communication has been so effective that people now think that anything they don't recognize is an invasive fish.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And so we just need a little yin to that yang. We just need a little bit of extra information, right? That
our native species need a spotlight.
Right. Just like, attention, bowfin are in this lake, because bowfin, even in Minnesota, are getting labeled as invasive or getting called snakeheads or stuff. Because the snakeheads get all the attention, and then people finally catch a bowfin, which are only found in a limited area of Minnesota. Then they catch one and like, whoa, I saw that on TV.
It's a
Actually,
snakehead.
No, you didn't.
No.
Right.
Yes.
And so we just need a little bit of that extra information, and the signs and signage, like at the point of access, to let people know, hey, if you see a fish that looks like this, you're actually seeing something really cool. And we got to get away from this mindset of like, there's walleye, bass, sunfish, and invasive.
Right.
And
I don't recognize that, so I got to kill it.
Oh, 100%. I've heard that. And so, yeah, that's one of the goals we're hoping to do this year is get some signs, and, then it'll be my job to go around and talk to talk to the park district or whatever, and get permission to put up a little sign that says, this lake is home to bigmouth buffalo or shorthead red horse or something.
Yeah.
Just to get people a little bit curious and hopefully get them to appreciate a little bit the native fish diversity that might have been under their nose.
Yeah.
And I plants are my blind spot, right?
Yeah.
They're all green. And I was out at a place I go on a regular basis, and I thought that the plants were wild parsnip, which is an invasive species. And I was actually out there with a plant person, and they're like, "Oh, that's not wild parsnip. That's a great angelica." I was told. And they're like, "That's a wild, or that's a native plant that thrives in wetlands." And I realized, like, it clicked with me, and I went, "Oh wait, this place isn't degraded. It's actually native plants." And I was like, I hope I can bring that same feeling to people about fish.
Mm-hmm. Well, hey, when I caught my first sheep's head, I was actually bullhead fishing off a dock, and I got the bite. I set the hook. I realized, okay, this is again, I thought it was a big bass or a big pike, and then I see this thing, and I didn't even know what it was. I was just like, wow, this is a huge fish. That was a lot of fun. Took a picture of it, and then I let it go because I didn't know what it was. And then I was showing somebody like the next day, and they're like, dang, dude, that's a huge sheep's head. I'm like, sheep's head? Yeah, freshwater drum. I was like, first time I ever caught one, didn't even know what I was holding. All I know is it didn't have any teeth, and it put up a heck of a fight, and I was addicted from then on. Then I started learning about everything. When I started going after Master Angler Awards, I got I know now, silver red horse, but I caught this huge quote-unquote sucker while I was sturgeon fishing, and I knew that there was different kinds of suckers, so I sent a picture. I texted it from the boat. I sent it to Scott Mockington, and I was like, Scott, what kind of red horse or sucker is this? And he said, man, I'm 99% sure it's a silver, and it's a big one. And it was that moment again, like, I knew I'd caught a red horse of some kind, but I didn't know which one. So then he sends me this infographic of just the underside of like 6 different red horse, and it's this drawn out, and it's the different lip shapes. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you've seen that infographic before.
Yeah, that's the one. I think it's a tricolor, like it's red, and it's got all the scale counts and
blue. It's like red, blue, and some other color. Yeah, and kind of a
the guy who did that infographic is actually on the Native Fish Board of Directors.
Awesome. Yeah, I printed that off, and I got to print off another one because I lost it, but I, did the old packing tape lamination trick, and I carried it with me. Olaf made a version that you can fold up to the size of a business card, so you can keep it in your wallet. Awesome.
Yeah, you can. That's available on moxostoma.com.
Oh, there you go. And I know that I'm kind of, I'm one of few that just really, really nerd out when it comes to fish.
There are more of you and more of us. Growing. The numbers are growing every day. There's so many in the pandemic. In some ways, has been great for us because so many people have come to fishing, to escape their apartment over the last couple of years.
Yep.
And it sounds to me like you kind of came to fishing in the same way I did. I didn't have any preconceptions. I thank my dad on a regular basis because he didn't teach me how to fish. He taught me how to hunt. But I came at all this stuff without preconceptions, and so the first time I caught a sheep's head or whatever, nobody was there to tell me that it wasn't a good thing to catch. And so for me, it was all, it's all equal. And it was just a matter of which ones are the biggest and the hardest to catch.
Yeah. 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 And my dad, he liked to fish, but he was more into the trapping and hunting. We'd take little trips up to Lake of the Woods to walleye fish like twice a year. And he'd take me someplace. We'd throw bobbers out for bluegill. He wasn't really super into it. And, I don't know how I don't know how I got into fishing, to be honest with you. I just did at a really young age. And yeah, so I had that same thing, like, oh, that's trash. That's garbage. And then the other part of me is just maximizing my fun. And then it was fishing in a bass club as a young teenager. And I remember it like it happened yesterday. Like, it was dead calm. It was like 95 degrees. The bass were not cooperating whatsoever, but the bays were just full of like crappies and bowfin and bluegills. And like, that was the moment where I was like, you know what? I just want to fish for opportunities. I don't care what color it is, what it does, how. I just want to catch fish. And and then I started getting into bullhead fishing and going, wow, here's nobody else is doing this. This is really a lot of fun. Such a neat critter, you know?
Yeah. Because every fish in Minnesota has an amazing story to tell just by virtue of surviving here. And then the other thing too is, like, there is a day for bass fishing, and that's the day that the bass are going crazy, and there's a day for lake trout fishing, and that's when, in the spring when they're up shallow and you can catch them from your campsite. It's like if you fish for everything, you very rarely have a bad day fishing, because you can pivot without feeling like you're making a sacrifice.
You hit the nail on the head, because bullheads are my go-to in quote unquote the dog days of summer, when the bite kind of, for all the fancy stuff, gets a little bit tough. It's like, hey man, let's go float some crawlers near the bottom and try to catch some monster bullheads. And I've actually turned on a couple of guys to that are like, you know what, dude, this is kind of fun. It is kind of fun just to sit, relax, listen to the radio, and catch a fish that you don't normally catch that's actually kind of cool. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like everything has some like amazing, like fact or some, something about it that is different from all the other stuff. Like, it's, you might as well celebrate it. It's a lot easier than building giant hatcheries to replace it with something else.
And I've said before, these rough fish, you can learn like the relationships. Like, so if I'm looking for new big bluegill water, I look for, in creel censuses, I look for high pike, high bowfin, either one or a combo of, and I also look for a large bullhead population.
Really?
And they're like, yeah. And I've had people tell me that, and I'm like, well, here's the thing. If there's lots of bullheads, that means it's got a really soft, muddy bottom. And where do bugs like to live? Boom, soft, muddy bottoms. Yeah. Then I look at the predators. I'm not even looking at bluegills on the chart. That comes the very last step. Then I'm looking at the predators and the size range that they've creel sensed from there. And, if there's a decent amount of bigger pike or bowfin, the chances are those bluegill numbers are going to be really low, but they're going to be of better quality.
Yeah.
So I go out to this new body of water. I know I'm going to lose a bunch of jigs, but when I do catch a bluegill, it's going to be substantially larger than the average one. So I've used these lesser, the bowfin and the bullhead, the rough fish, as indicators of a better quality of game fish.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to be said for that. And you also touched on that with the smallmouth and red horse relationship.
For sure.
I know the muskie there a few years back was getting a bad rap because they wanted to plant and people were like, they eat all these fish, right? Well, truth be told, that lakes that have muskies in them, other populations of fish thrive.
Yeah.
And one of those relationships, if you want big crappies, you should look for a lake that has big muskies. And there happens to be a lake just south of town like that. It's got rather large muskies in it, very small crappie population, but those crappies that are catchable in there, are 14 plus inches.
Yeah.
It's just
We
harder.
don't want 6-inch crappies.
Yeah.
Like, let the muskies eat them.
Yeah. 100%, man. Yeah, and I'm really excited, and congratulations on the no junk fish bill making it through the hurdles. I am excited for the future, and I'm going to put my hat in the ring to help.
There was a whole coalition there. There was so many conservation organizations, and I couldn't have done it alone. So it's a labor of love for me, obviously, but the support that I've seen from Minnesota's conservation community, and also I got to say too, this is like the good part about social media is I have spent so much of my life. So many people have told me that these fish are trash or disparage them or something like that, and so it means more to me when somebody reaches out and says, that they appreciate my work. Mm-hmm. After a lifetime of arguing with people on the bank that they are in fact not carp, it's the support and everything it just means so much. And this is the first step. This is this no junk fish bill gets us over this funding hurdle. So the DNR can devote some staff time to it, and it sets the stage for the next set of regulations, which and these statutory changes, which are going to undo this false dichotomy that we've been using since 1907. This is a huge moment in fish management.
Yeah,
and Minnesota's leading the way on this. There are states that are looking to watch how this goes, and I think they're going to find out that when you treat fish like they're a resource, manage them like a resource, people will act like they're a resource, and you'll have more of that resource to go around. So the future is very bright in Minnesota for all of our fishing.
That's awesome, dude. And like I said, I applaud you, sir, and I want to, get my foot in that door and help out any way I can, whether it's through the podcast or, attending events. And I'm going to continue to do my thing too. Like I've said it a bunch of times on here and scrolling through my Instagram and stuff. You'll see me, hoisting pictures of all the different shaped fish in Minnesota that I can get my hands on, and talking about them with great enthusiasm and joy, because that's what they bring to me. I'm not falsely doing anything. I just genuinely love catching fish. And like my beloved rock bass, I've turned a lot of people on to the idea of, wow, you know what, Patrick, you're right. Those are kind of fun. And I said, yeah, I mean, even if what you're after isn't biting and you find a school of those guys, they're entertaining and they're cool and they're neat. And they're, you start getting big ones and you start looking at things differently. And that's why I've always promoted like the Master Angler program. That to me is a very important thing that I would like to see a little bit more work on, because that just really, when you have this list, people are competitive by nature, or they want to get certificates or something. They want validation. And, when I started looking at that list, I was like, the first thing I did was like, I want to look at the rough fish stuff. Yeah. And it's an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to catch a cool fish. And it just brings everything right out front, and it's more recognizable. And then all of a sudden you're like, no, that is a goldeye, not a mooneye. And here's why. It's because I need to get one of those for a master angler. So I've learned like how to identify these things,
and man, actually that's when it's like, I always have to look up if the anal fin and dorsal fin are even, or because
see, I look
those are tough.
I look at their eye. The moon eye is silver, and the yellow one is gold eye.
Yeah, no, actually, I need to add the goldeye to my life list. I have not gotten that one yet. I've got like 50 species of Minnesota fish, but I have not gotten the goldeye yet.
I haven't either.
So,
Moon eyes I actually chase on the fly rod midsummer, and
yeah,
it's really, really difficult to get them on a fly rod.
yeah.
They miss and they will not come back for a second time. Learned that
Yeah.
the hard way. So even as something as weird as a moon eye, man, there's a huge challenge to that.
They're
not just
fun, and they will take a dry fly, and they are super fun and acrobatic to catch. So, like, I do recommend people give that one a try.
Yeah, and you brought up whitefish and like tulipies earlier, and that's actually I think when I was on Facebook, there's an actual whitefish enthusiast page. Like,
Cool.
I can't remember his name. I just know his handles 330 Maniac. He's also a beaver trapper. I can't think of his name right offhand, but he goes out at a certain time of the year and targets whitefish, and he's turned a bunch of people on to targeting whitefish. There's a small group of people here in town that just get fired up to go catch tulipies on Lake Bemidji, and I've done it, and it's super fun. You're over like 60 feet of water, and they're chasing you up and down. They're like little miniature lake trout. They're wildly aggressive, and when you get on that, that's really cool. I have yet to do it, but I have a buddy that actually goes and catches smelt through the ice with tiny ice jigs on Lake Orbegon on the Iron Range. And he targets them. He catches them one at a time, but he's like, they're like little tiny barracuda, and they're just wild. They're fun. They got little teeth and everything. I'm like, dude, I've got to catch that, you know?
Yeah.
I've not stuck my toes in, but I've read a lot about this other movement that's been around for a long time, and I'm starting to meet people that are getting into it, but it's microfishing.
Yeah. That they swear. I know many microfishers who swear that like once you start doing it, that it I have some size 26 hooks, but I've not. I'm afraid that if I go down that rabbit hole, that I won't come back.
Well, you're not alone in that, because that's why I've said I've just read about it. And one of my favorite books that I have in my collection, besides a pile of Star Wars books, is the Great Fishes of Minnesota book. And it lists, all the minnow species. And I've read through that enough times that I was working with this young kid, and we were talking about fishing. He's like, and he goes, "Hey man, do you know what this is?" And I said, "Well, that happens to be a log perch." And his eyes got super huge. He was really into microfishing. And I was like, I've never caught one. And then that conversation started getting into the microfishing, and he was like, "Man, you should do it." And I was like, "No, I don't want to right yet, because I'm going to put that on the list. I will do it at some time, but that is just cool enough and just nerdy enough that I would abandon everything else that I'm trying to get into or work on. Would completely fall to the wayside.
And your job and grooming and responsibilities. I recommend buying, I believe it's called the Perfect Dip Net from Jonah's Aquarium, which is a minnow dip net that is indestructible. And you can collect. I own one, and I've collected a lot of really cool minnows and darters with the dip net, without standing in the stream with an ice fishing rod in a size 30 hook that I had to order from Japan.
Oh yeah, and I love YouTube, and I've watched some ice fishing from Japan. I've watched guys. It was really cool, and I try to explain it. People like they're trying to do what? Catch the smallest fish in the world on a hook and line, and they're using silk line. This craftsman is shaving down like a 12-inch piece of bamboo to just the right action, and they're in this little tiny stream, and he gets this minnow that what we would consider a pinhead minnow, but he caught it on a hook. And to me, I'm like, that is super badass. That is wild. And I could go and do that, and then the next day I could be up on the Rainy River with, 8 night crawlers on a hook waiting for 100-pound fish.
Yeah. No, and I mean, there is such a diversity of those small fish in Minnesota that get even less attention than the suckers that are super cool. And I've had the privilege to do some sampling and collect some of those fish. And it's like they could be, some of them you catch them, they could be in an aquarium, but they go totally unrecognized.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm pretty sure that I could. It takes too much time. It is a whole different challenge. So I just haven't done that.
I think I'm gonna save microfishing for like my retirement piece. It seems very low impact. And very easy to do. Well, not easy to do, but like equipment wise,
Yes.
the rod could fit in your pocket if need be, if you wanted to do it hook line. But yeah, that'll be my retirement piece. I'll open up that chapter when I'm ready, and I'll be like, I'm a micro fisherman now.
We're both going to get inundated with people being like, I'll take you microfishing. And I'm like, yep, that we can't, I can't risk being addicted to it.
Yeah, it's not that I don't want to fish with you. It's just that I know what will happen to me.
Right. Yep.
Well, hey man, I'm going to let you get going. Why don't you tell everybody real quick where they can find you, and I'll let you spill out all the links that you need, and then I will also try to get those so I can get that in the description of this podcast.
You can follow Native Fish for Tomorrow on Instagram is a great place to follow us.
Mm-hmm.
At Native Fish for Tomorrow. And I believe the 4 is the number 4.
Yes.
Native Fish for Tomorrow, number 4. We also have a great website, nativefishfortomorrow.org. You can follow me on Instagram at buffalo_catcher. And I try to keep that up to date with fishing tips and latest fishing native fish and rough junk fish, no junk fish bill news and stuff like that. So those are probably the 2, Native Fish for Tomorrow, and then you can follow me on Instagram is the best place to find me.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. We were gonna do this. We just wanted to make sure that everything went through just fine, right?
Yeah, we just waiting for that to be signed on the before the cell. We can't pop the champagne until you're.
Yeah, and I just want to say, man, like I said, I appreciate you taking the time, and I value our friendship that we've made over the last couple of years over rough fish, and I would like that to be also a little silver lining for anybody out there. Like, hey, man, you can make friends whether you're walleye fishing or sucker fishing, man. Just get out there and have fun and appreciate it, and go on adventures, man.
It's even easier to make friends when you're sucker fishing because you don't have that same level of competition for as for walleyes. And so if you tell somebody you like catching suckers and they're like, I like catching suckers too, you're friends.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I was going to bring up, not to drag this on, but I don't know if you saw that article, but there was another couple of guys that got caught cheating in a fishing tournament, but it was a sucker fishing tournament. Did you hear about that?
I did hear that somebody had done that, and it's like, well, there's a lot of pride there,
Oh, it didn't make the news, the national news, like the walleye fellas, but I when I saw that, I thought of you, and I was like, I wonder if he's seen this and was like, what is going on, and where is this tournament?
That's the growing pains of it's like, hey, we're gonna make the big time, and then we're gonna have these same problems in the native fish community. So, we'll celebrate for that when we get there. So,
all right, sounds good.
Right.
Well,
you take care, catch some fish.
Yeah, you do the same.
I'm gonna go and catch.
And
I'm gonna be fishing this weekend.
Yeah, I'm gonna. Yeah, I gotta get some stuff ready. My daughter's coming soon, and I'll get that tube out, and I'm gonna go rock bass fishing. It's been a while since I caught one of those guys, so
it's Memorial Day weekend, but just like go out for something that isn't too popular.
Yeah, for sure, man, for sure. All right, man. Well, I'll let you get out of here, and thanks and you're welcome to come back anytime, man.
All right, we'll do.
All right, take care.